charges are brought by a foreign power, which themselves are not really, well, they are not adjudicated upon in this country. That's not the role of extradition. What happens is that there's a certain limited amount of scrutiny. I'm keeping this very short. And although there may be a charge from overseas, the individual in this country gets locked into a process where that person may be in detention for many years. Witness the case of Abu Hamza, for instance, who is still in detention many years later, and the US still haven't succeeded in extraditing him. What these methods do is to sidestep legal structures, take people out of the situation and get them off the streets, but it is a system which actually avoids what should really be happening, which is what has always happened before, which is trying people in the normal criminal courts. Delay in bringing cases to trial, more of a problem in some countries than others, or in concluding legal proceedings is also non-criminal proceedings is also a significant problem. That is one aspect. One of the arguments used in order to justify this change, in order to justify this broadening of the categories in which persons can be either arrested or otherwise administratively detained, is that the threat that exists is something different. It is not from an organization which is a typical armed organization which has hierarchical structures where one can see who to target and who not to target and who is in a chain of command. This is, to coin a phrase, a situation in which there are free radicals and we don't know where they're going to be coming from. We've had free radicals before for centuries. The activities of such persons have been perfectly capable of being controlled by the systems that we have built up in this country and systems that underpin international human rights instruments. None of these matters, therefore, justify the volume of derogation from human rights standards that we have seen in the past 11 years or so in particular. So far as detention is concerned, and I'll just make this the last point on detention before saying a little bit about fair trial rights, and then I suspect I'll have to finish. In relation to Article 5 of the Convention of Human Rights and detention, we have had in this country different forms of detention. It's really preventative detention. Detaining people because we can't remove them, because we can't charge them, we don't have the evidence that we're prepared to disclose. And that sort of power was struck down in the House of Lords, well, held to be incompatible at any rate, in 2004, but replaced by a system of control orders, which are now about to be replaced by the present government, which thought the control orders in this country were inadequate, but really very little of substance is going to change. It's going to be control orders under the new regime by a different name. These are systems of house arrest in effect. And the debates that have taken place in this country has been how to actually monitor and limit such individuals for how many hours a day they can be allowed out. And all of this on the basis of evidence that they are, in substance, unable to confront. That leads me on to fair trial rights, being able to confront the evidence in respect which justifies the action that is being taken against you. A system has grown up in this country of specially appointed advocates who will be able to view that evidence, but they can't discuss it with the actual individual who is the target of the particular measure. This seems to be the only system that we've been able to come up with, that the legal communities have been able to come up with so far. but I question its place. It goes back to the point I made at the start. If it is the case that it is possible to actually prosecute an individual, that individual should be prosecuted in the ordinary courts. So far as other forms of action are concerned, those actions may well have to be foregone. The risk may well have to be lived with. As Lord Panic put it in one of our cases, sometimes democracy has to fight with one hand tied behind its back. That is what distinguishes it, marks a defining characteristic of it. So the systems that we've built up of intervention in people's private lives, of detaining, of denial of fair trial rights over the past 11 years or so, haven't just stopped there. They have actually invaded all aspects of life of communities. Charities are scrutinized, community groups are scrutinized, the visible presence of people of a certain color are scrutinized, or people who wear certain types of headgear are scrutinized. People who are not necessarily Muslims are also detained and stopped. I speak from personal experience in relation to that. And this brings into play the whole question of the interaction between these rights and the right of individuals to be free in public spaces, which brings a whole new discussion. If I can just stop there and say, go back to the theme that I started with, only if you hang on to the fundamentals and don't throw the baby out with the bathwater can we actually ensure that we do not bring about a generation of people who are disillusioned, who disengage, and who are then feel alienated, which creates much greater threats to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. If I will now be permitted to make a few remarks myself. Panelists for their presentations and the audience.
So that's why you should correct it.
I accept.
I'm about this. Yes, you correct it.
It is fine now, is it?
Yes.
Very well. So I was saying I'd like to thank the presenters, panelists for their presentations. It has been extremely interesting. And also the audience, of course, for their patience in listening so attentively. I have only a few brief remarks to make about international criminal justice and its relation to this issue of human rights. Over the past 2 decades, the process of international criminal justice has become a very, very potent weapon in the enforcement of human rights, in the fight against impunity, and in ensuring that those people who are suspected of having played a leading role in the serious violations of human rights are brought to account. It has not always been the case. As Justice Desmond De Silva rightly observed, the first time that the world tried this was half a century before the next court was established. Not forgetting, of course, the little experiment that we did in the Gambia in 1981 in establishing the first hybrid tribunal to deal with these kinds of offenses. Yet within these 2 past decades in which international criminal justice has operated and actually acquired maturity, it has made a lot of progress. The work has essentially been carried out by the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia and the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, both of which were established by the United Nations Security Council acting under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter. That, of course, has legal implications. The method used by the Security Council in creating those institutions, i.e. under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter, meant that their establishment was closely related or was based on the maintenance of international peace and security. And so all decisions of those 2 tribunals are binding on all member states of the United Nations. That's one very, very important consequence of their method of establishment. Since then, of course, we've also had the Special Court of served as a chief prosecutor for many years. We've had the special tribunal for Lebanon. We've had the extraordinary jurisdiction for Cambodia also in operation. I come from the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, which was created in 1994 in response to the genocide which occurred in Rwanda over a period of 100 years, involving the death of close to 1 million people over those 100 years. The response of the Security Council was to create this tribunal, mandated with the responsibility of prosecuting people for the crimes of genocide, war crimes and crimes against humanity in relation to that particular tragic period in Rwandan history. So far, what have we done? Where are we? Of course, as an international tribunal, we have our limitations, as all international tribunals do. We cannot prosecute everybody. So we restricted our operations to indicting those who play the leading role, the top level people. And that's why we indicted only 93 personalities. But there were 93 very big fish, as we say, from the Prime Minister who was then in charge of the government, to cabinet ministers, to the leaders of the military, senior public officials, and also in addition to members of the media who played a role in inciting public hatred and inciting the public to hate and to hunt the minority Tutsi groups who were the target of the genocide. Incidentally, too, we indicted some religious leaders who also, instead of protecting their flock, turned against them and conspired to have them decimated. We have arrested all but 9 of those 93 people from about 30 countries. And of those we have arrested, we've finished definitively the prosecution of 59 so far, and many more judgments are expected before the end of the year. We anticipate, as a matter of fact, that by the end of this year or early next year, we will have finished the trial phase of our work, and then finish the appeals by the end of 2012 or early 2013. Our work is just an example of what the other tribunals are doing. Between them, these ad hoc tribunals have, in 2 decades, managed to bring to account more than 300 senior people who, in the past, would have evaded justice because of their status, because of their influence, and because of their power. Those kinds of people are usually people who national systems cannot or will not prosecute. And it took the intervention of the international criminal justice process to secure their arrest and prosecution. From the Milosevic, Charles Taylor, to former Prime Minister Jean Kambala, and many others. It's only that process which has managed to bring justice to them and to the victims. The ad hocs also have, within that short period of 2 decades, greatly expanded the jurisprudence of international criminal law. They have interpreted the Genocide Convention, defined the elements of all these various offenses, as well as their defenses. They have established certain international rules of practice and procedure. And equally importantly, also developed certain best practices and skills in relation to how to investigate and prosecute across national frontiers these sorts of serious offenses. That's quite a big challenge. But today, of course, there's more of a challenge than that. All these ad hoc tribunals are about to finish their work. Within the next 2 or 3 years, these ad hoc tribunals, from one for Yugoslavia, Rwanda one, Cambodia, Sierra Leone, in fact, will be closing much earlier. But all of them would have closed. And what we would be left with would be the International Criminal Court. That is a court created by states parties, not by the United Nations. It's created by states parties. That, of course, raises challenges for the future of international criminal justice. Having seen that process is so important to enforcement of human rights,